Start recording. Ta-da. Cool. And then I can send the cloud link after for everybody to do what they will.
Are you who's starting the or I guess who's going to host? Are you hosting, Kurt or Bruce? Or you'd set this up, Bruce? So I mean, go ahead.
I'd like to host it if it's okay.
Okay, please. Yeah. I'll shut up and I'm going to start the recording. And I think, or we are recording. Yeah,
it is recording. We're recording.
All right.
I'm also recording on OBS, but anyway, talk for a second amongst yourself. I'm just going to grab the agenda so I can go through it. I'm sorry about this today.
No worries.
Good to see you, buddy.
Hey, good to see you too, Gavin.
Yeah,
quick question for everyone, just so we get it out in the open. I know Bruce has a YouTube channel, so and he's also recording it on his own. So are both of you okay with Bruce eventually kind of posting this? This can be a public video. So yeah,
I assumed this would go public. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
You're okay with it as well, Gavin? I mean, you're always ready to go public.
I'm recording this. I'm going to distribute. I'll distribute this once we get it out there. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Good.
The main thing is that we can be sure that if we say anything we regret.
Well, let me go ahead and get the kind of the crowd started, Bruce, because we're on the record. And basically Bruce called this meeting today. It's kind of going to be what we were thinking was like, I guess what you had in mind, Bruce, you're going to go through kind of an agenda, but just some of the topics that we can all talk about and get it out there to the State of the Union affairs about peer-to-peer electronic cash and what's happening. So it's going to be an exciting show, and maybe we could do it again as well. So I, on my end, probably have only maybe at maximum till the top of the hour, but maybe a little, I'll go off camera if I have to at the end. So, but I can stick around. So, but yeah, over to you, Bruce.
Okay, great. Can I share the screen so you can see, everyone can see the agenda? We can hack and edit this if we want to later, but the audience would be good to have a quick look at what we're going to do. Basically, the purpose is to examine possibilities for using media to increase public awareness of BSV and adoption, because a lot of the technical work has been done to build it since 2008, and it's been improved with Teranode to handle massive traffic. And in a previous web chat with Brett Banfi, we established fairly well that BSV is ready to roll. That is massive scaling and basically transforming the internet, but it hasn't got out there amidst all the acrimony and confusion about BTC. So what we're going to discuss is possibilities in using media, just like any company does, to advertise and activism and so on, so that BSV might flare up and become what we expect it will be. All right, I'm going to share the screen now so you can have a peek at the agenda. Share the screen. This is it on number 4. And share the sound. Yes, share. And we'll plot our way through that. I'll bring that over. Just hang on a second.
Well,
can you see that?
Yeah, thank you, Bruce, for being so prepared and organized too. This is awesome. I'm so not used to it on my end, so I am just a complete. So I appreciate it very, very much.
Welcome. We had a few hassles at the start, but it's rolling now. All right, let's talk about, and you can disagree with me if you like. I just want to go through this to make sure that we're on the right track. The justification for going global with media is one part of that is whether or not BSV is viable and ready to roll. Now, Brett and I talked about that at some length, and I got the impression from Brett, and you can confirm, Kurt, if you like, that you reckon that BSV could take over if it was adopted by a big player like X or Facebook or something, whatever it is. Facebook would be bypassed eventually, but if a big player came up and the massive traffic, it is viable. It wouldn't break. It would carry the traffic. People would be able to access BSV, that is, buy it, to use it. Companies would be able to buy it, use it, sell it. So there are channels for that. Is that true? I'll ask Kurt, because you're quite a guy here.
Sure. Yeah, no, I mean, it's a great question. I think it depends on the speed of adoption. So right now, as far as organic traffic goes, there's not a ton of organic traffic, but I think the network the network is good right now for probably an honest 10 or 15,000 transactions per second. In its disjointed, disconnected state, you know, because nobody's had real pressure to make anything very, very, you know, heavily optimized. You know, the network is fine for what it does. Now, the amount of traffic that a company like X does, if they were to say, hey, we want to put all of our interactions on chain, we would need, like, just speaking for myself, Gorilla Pool would need to, you know, update our data center stuff. Like we would need to have more compute, more RAM, more disk read and write speed, and all that kind of stuff. Now that's pretty easy. The current SV node implementation is not great in a lot of ways, but it's also a lot better than anything else that exists out there. So if we were to get like heads up essentially that X was coming our direction, if we had like a, you know, a memorandum of understanding or that sort of thing, we could probably be up and running inside of a month in such a way that we could ingest all the transactions, get them, you know, spread out properly across the peer-to-peer network, et cetera, et cetera.
Gavin, you were going to say something?
No, I was just lifting my microphone. I'm sorry. I'm listening.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Kurt, Kurt,
yeah,
can you tell me if there was a surge of traffic, what does that do to the network and to the reputation of BSV? Let's say you get your month's notice, but on day one, day two, it goes live and there's 1 million transactions a second. What happens? Does it die? Does it embarrass everybody?
No. Well, it depends. It depends how and who is a big deal. So Gorilla Pool doesn't have a ton of hash power. We're between 5 and 10% of the network on a given day. And so if we were to be the sole ingestion point, so if they were using our ARC endpoint and trying to push 1 million transactions a second, if we had sufficiently planned for RAM to keep that in the mempool as it currently exists, and I say this with the caveat that we are running Teranode, but we are not running Teranode in production for building blocks. So if that showed up now, it would be problematic if we didn't have the heads up to be able to plan for the RAM. Right now, the mempool would be the biggest bottleneck.
When you say problematic, do you mean that transactions would fail, money would be lost, people would be embarrassed? What specifics?
Probably not lost. Lost is not the right word, but they would be. There would be synchronization issues. So BSV, the SV node, has an issue with losing parent transactions. So there's the child pays for parent chaining problem that would be based on the way that X would likely use the system. There would be a difficulty in keeping these things square. So we would have to have somebody full time watching for dropped transactions and rebroadcasting them to make sure that the backlog of looking for a missing transaction does not overwhelm the node infrastructure and bring the node offline. That would be saying is that the
user would experience delay. Of what size of delay would you expect? An hour or two, a day? What would you think?
At that level, I mean, we've never come close. I mean, that would be 100 times or 1,000 times more stress than has ever been stress tested on the network. So we're talking about thermonuclear war. It's like asking, like, how would we do if we were invaded by aliens? Yeah. And so my response would be, I don't know what I don't know about the aliens. So I can only guess.
Therefore, it sounds to me we are not ready yet to go live with BSV.
Again, it depends on the order of magnitude. If X were only to use it for payments and tipping, for example, and they were to use one set ordinals to, let's say they wanted to use money tokens in order to just facilitate tipping, a lot of that calculation is happening outside of node infrastructure. So it's happening in the money indexer, the one set indexers and stuff. They're just doing a lot of that work, doing it really efficiently, and then pushing hashes to the chain. Like, that could work no problem at a scale that would benefit X right now. Like it could be done. There would be, so that kind of thing. The problem, and this is really what Teranode is designed for, is that sort of metanet or big IoT, big data application kind of stuff. We're replacing the internet sort of use cases. Yeah. And those are lofty. And there's also not a lot of demand for them. So the work going into having done that, it's just not been engineered for, hey, we need the whole globe to do this tomorrow. Because there's not.
Right then.
But payments, just to clarify, but anything related to simple payments between people, we could take on more than the entire blockchain space. Like we could replace Zelle and Cash App and like all those kind of things. All of that kind of stuff could move to BSV and using either dollar equivalent tokens or using the BSV token itself. And like we could absorb all of that, no problem. That would not be a problem.
So you're saying individuals and corporations, we could open the gate to that traffic and be confident no matter how big it got, we'd handle it.
Yes, but just based on how much of that traffic exists today elsewhere, we could absorb essentially all of it globally and not have that be an issue.
And if it did happen, let's say we did open the gates and say, okay, as a micropayment system, BSV is viable. Bring it on. We can handle up to 1 million transactions, a second, and we will do that. And even if it failed, if it went to 10 million, we can say the worst case would be that it got delayed. Your transactions would not be lost. They might be delayed, but they would not be lost anyway, and that's extremely unlikely. So we in this room here, us four, we can say we are confident that we could cope with the micropayments and payments traffic pretty much no matter what, even at worst case of delaying the payments a little bit and being able to adjust afterwards, right?
I would be comfortable saying that, yes.
All right, okay, that's good enough for me. So it's viable. That means that we can consider going to global effective communications, advertising, promotion, that wakes up the world to BSV at the highest levels, and we can withstand the onslaught of the traffic that might arise. I'm quick to think again, Kurt, I'll ask you, can the demand, that is, say, people ringing up the BSV association saying, we need it for this, we need it for that, can that traffic be managed in the sense that no, you cannot do that, we will not allow that, and we can stop you doing that, or not?
Not really. I mean, it's a public network. We've seen an example of this with the OJBK token. It was like a Chinese gambler token that the way it was designed really overutilized one specific type of resource, basically UTXO set calculation. And it was really problematic for the nodes. And so,
okay, so we can't stop unwanted traffic. I mean, you were saying it's fine. You were saying it can cope with the volume of micropayments and payments between individuals and corporations, fine, but we cannot stop it being swamped either just by natural demand or even by intentional disruption by other players, right?
Well, and that's the interesting thing. I mean, a public network, especially when you have, I mean, there's 1 billion people out there that can come up with ways to try to destroy any system. And like, this is how the internet works too. It's when you talk about the most secure systems in the world, like you could talk about Experian, the credit agency, or you could talk about FireEye, the cybersecurity company that works for the U.S. Department of Defense. And both of those have been hacked because there's 1 billion people on Earth that sit and think about ways to hack it. And so nothing is perfect. Bitcoin is a risk mitigation system. It is not a perfection system.
Is there any way of partitioning the treasured micropayment system so that it is diverse and varied in its channels, like the internet itself, so that there's better security for that BSV individual?
Sure. It's a little bit, I mean, that's partially why Teranode has been engineered in the first place, is to allow for there to be multiple ways to do lots of things. Like it's a modular system instead of currently it's a monolithic system for signature validation and building blocks and whatever else. And what Teranode does is it allows certain use cases to be broken out. So let's assume my company, Gorilla Pool, wants to focus on those sort of IoT and MetaNet style transactions. So we would create an ingestion point, like an ARC fork, essentially, and say, hey, if you want to be doing social media data and tokens exclusively, send everything through this API. This API will be specialized to do rapid signature validation and smart contract validation. So we would put, a lot of extra GPUs and all this stuff on this very specific use case to make sure that we can specialize in that thing, while somebody else might just focus and say, hey, look, we really just want to support payment wallets, so we're going to specialize for Hand Cash and CentB and Rock Wallet and whatever else.
Okay. So
yes, but it would require a little bit of prep.
Okay, so you could give to potential customers, you say, this sector of the functionality is available to you exclusively, in inverted commas, because it's not sure, but you can say, if you want to flood your stuff through there, we'll look after you as best we can, but it's pretty good. All right?
Yes, correct.
All right. Now, another thing is, does the in-chain fraternity and the BSV fraternity in general have the confidence of launching to yet unknown amount of traffic in this electronic age where things can happen, especially with AI, very fast? Is the fraternity happy? If we said, promise you tomorrow, we're going to have speakers in the Senate praising BSV and demanding the entire US government use BSV for all its transactions, and X will be too, because Elon Musk is in on this, would the BSV fraternity say, hooray, or would they say, oh no, this is terrible, it's going to crash, it's not going to work? What would they think?
So I want to pass to Gavin after about a 20-second response here. In my opinion, I think some people would be irritable, and anybody with an entrepreneurial bone in their body would be very excited at the opportunity. Me, I would say, okay, I'm just not going to sleep this week, and my whole team is going to burn the candle at both ends to make sure the customer is happy, because we have no better problem to have than too much business. And I'm a minority in that, because entrepreneurs are a minority in essentially every situation, but I would be very excited to lose sleep that week for that reason. And I see Gavin had his hand up and wants to comment.
Yeah. Thank you, Bruce, and thank you for the question, Kurt, and comment there. So before we go on to that next topic there, that you have on the list there about additional consideration, back to the secure issue, I want to ask everybody about this, at least ask Brett and Kurt about what their thoughts are. There's a huge meme and talks going around about quantum computing. And I've seen kind of a little bit of banter going back and forth with Kurt about it. And I don't know about you, Brett, but there's definitely a lot of people who like myself, who don't necessarily understand what it even means, first of all. And is there a risk of it with Bitcoin potentially? Because, some of the podcasts, people who really don't know what they're talking about, they say there's a huge risk. But from some guys like you who actually know what you're talking about, can you describe what is quantum computing, and is there a risk for Bitcoin with it?
So, I mean, I'll keep it surface level, because there's, MIT scientists could talk about quantum for a decade and not get to the end of what they know about it or theorize about it. But in a very basic sense, what quantum computing is doing, it's not just really, really fast. What it's doing is it's taking a set of data that's super large, and it's essentially ingesting all of it at the same time. And that would include cryptographic keys, right? So imagine if you had the ability to memorize an entire book, like maybe it's the entire Bible or the entirety of Moby Dick or whatever, and somebody were to say, okay, what's on page 333 of this book? And you could just recite it from memory, because that's how your mind worked. The concept behind quantum computing is the fact that a computer can essentially be pre-filled with the knowledge of all possible patterns. And therefore, instead of having to compute from A to Z to solve a problem, it can just simply grab the solution out of some fractal field of data. And that, first of all, doesn't exist today. It's largely just how the theory of quantum computing works. Now, there are ways that it can essentially guess and check and start to grab things out of this four-dimensional field and say, is that real? Is it, yes, no? So you're essentially trying to brute force reality. And they make these breakthroughs that a computer is that much more efficient doing it. Every few months or few years, a company like Google or whatever will say, we've made some new breakthrough, we're this much closer. The problem with calling something quantum and saying you're very close to breaking it is that the scale for efficiency is an exponential scale. It's kind of like the Richter scale for an earthquake, in that a 4.0 earthquake is not just slightly smaller than a 5.0. It's exponential on this increasing scale. And so to say that you're even 90% of the way to solving this quantum breakthrough that allows you to access the whole field of data, that last 10%, if the first 90% took you 50 years, the last 10% will take you another 1,000 years to break. And so it's one of these things that it makes for great headlines, and it's intriguing. It's an intriguing field of computer science. But even if we were 1% from the full solution, that 1% time would be hundreds of years in the future. And so
wouldn't it break the banks and everybody else before?
Well, yes, that's the thing. Bitcoin itself is not so valuable that it would be the first target. You would know that a quantum breakthrough had happened because everybody's bank accounts would be drained and everybody's privacy, like all of the, I could think of a million things that you could do with that would be more valuable. Breaking into the private online repos of your favorite celebrities or the most powerful nations, or I control the entire global nuclear submarine fleet would be something that you could do had you had this breakthrough.
So there's nothing we can do about it at the moment. It's a good point to raise if we're going to launch a new micropayment system, but there's nothing we can do much about. We just have to take that risk. Let's move on to.
Can I add one more caveat to that? Is that one of the strengths of Bitcoin that make it that much more quantum resistant is that it really is just a system of creating keys using cryptography in the first place. And so if there is a quantum breakthrough that breaks SHA-256, you can simply use the new system to create quantum SHA-256 and iterate on that very, very quickly. So you could re-secure Bitcoin pretty trivially relative to how slow it would take to re-secure all kinds of other legacy systems. So Bitcoin would be essentially the first thing that you could fix. And so I would argue that it would be a net good for Bitcoin if there were some kind of quantum breakthrough.
Bruce, before we move on, can I just respond to that? So because of, you mentioned Joe Rogan as one of the topics that we were going to talk about. And that was, this is like a big topic on Rogan that he's had guests on. And they make these conclusions that, okay, Bitcoin is useless, and therefore, because of quantum computers, and it's going to happen very, very soon, and no time. This is like the narrative. So while we and probably Kurt knows a heck of a lot different that that's not true, a lot of people believe that, and it's a huge risk in their mind. So
yeah. In the mainstream, a lot of people believe lots of things that are untrue, and that's okay.
Good to know, though. I appreciate you.
Yeah,
So
I am exactly 0% worried about quantum computing.
Okay, that's great to know. I'm so happy. I'm thrilled to hear that, because I was getting a little bit worried myself, but it sounds like it's the last. I guess if the whole financial system were to shut down, then Bitcoin would be next.
BSV is going to be the front horse in the race. Let's move on. Now, we can skip the points to cover, because I think we covered that: the scalability, cheap transactions, security of the network, low carbon, lawful, and is it ready for adoption and use. We've sort of covered that fairly well, and I'm fairly confident that we can consider, therefore, the idea of publicizing it for at worst an uncomfortable attempt to make it have huge uptake because of very good comms in the media. We'll move on to methods. I'll just move that agenda up a bit. Ideally, the methods, I think, would be cheap or free. None of us is really rich, except for maybe Craig Wright, but I don't know whether he or others in the Bitcoin fraternity would put money into communications. In a few years of dealing with BSV, have not seen much attempt at what I'd call good communications, effective advertising, memes in the media. I see a lot of good effort to improve the functionality of it and so on, but I don't see any sort of concerted effort to really put it in the headlines and get people talking about it. So from my experience, you can get into the headlines at no cost It might sound a bit weird, but the idea of publicity headlines is that it's newsy, not that it's important, just that it's newsy. If you do a giant panda in the street of New York, that's way more important to most people than Ukraine or Gaza, just because it's a giant panda and they like pandas. So
Sure.
that can work in our advantage if we are creative, because all we have to do is think creatively with the help of AIs that are very good at this sort of stuff, to have very eye-catching, very provocative stuff, not negative, but appealing, to illustrate that BSV is the real thing and that BTC is an imposter. We have to be very careful here to minimize hostility. And I thought that humor is one way of doing that. Good-natured publicity. Humor means people examine everything. Nothing happens in a great hurry. People get a chance to think. We're all friends. We're all in it together. Possibly there are mitigations that rescue the investors in BTC. I would so much like that. I'm not confident it can be done. I'll ask about that later. In fact, what I'll do right now is I'll ask Kurt, do you, I've asked Brett, but Kurt, do you think there is a reasonable possibility of a rescue of the $2 trillion of investment in BTC?
I think absolutely, and I think there's a couple good ways to do it. And so far nobody cares about them. But the wallet, his name is Lynn Zemming. He created Dot Wallet, and Dot Wallet had a feature that allowed you to tokenize BTC on BSV. Very simply, like multi-sig contract, essentially atomic swap. And okay, now you can put your BTC assets on BSV. Because the interesting thing is that BSV and BTC are, even though they are very different in a lot of particulars, they are very similar in a generalist sense. And so it's very easy for the data of BTC to be added to the network of BSV. And the way I see it is, I don't actually care what people value in a certain thing, because the liquidity and the valuation of BTC is itself just a meme. And so if you just say, okay, I'm going to tokenize all of my asset, let's say I have 1,000 BTC hidden somewhere, and I port that value over onto BSV to transact it there, if it's redeemable on the main network of BTC, and that's what people care about, you can actually run the network in a BSV node, because BSV, one of its particulars that is very different about BTC is that it's also useful as a generalized operating system or a generalized distributed computing system. And so the value of BTC and the network and the data of BTC, including private keys, public keys, and all the signature data and all this other stuff, this can all be put onto BSV and it can be resorbed that way. And the example that I'll give...
Kurt, that is wonderful news to me. That is just wonderful news. The possibility of it, the practical reality of being able to do it is wonderful. Talk to me now about the politics of it and the economics of it, the market, for example. What does it mean economically to a BTC holder? Does it mean they're safe and okay? Does it mean that Craig Wright has to consent to it? What are the barriers to it? And if you were the president of the USA now and you knew about this, how would you manage it so that the family was looked after, the whole family, and BSV holders weren't hurt? How would you do it?
So, I mean, it's an interesting question, right? It's the problem with everything is politics. Like they're having a little war right now over in BTC about op return. And it's one line of code, and it's a very, very trivial thing. And they have now been fighting about it for a good 2 or 3 months. And it's civil war. You're a CIA operative. No, you're some corporate operative. Everybody's an operative from, one villainous cabal or another. And it's one line of code. And it's literally just, can we add JPEGs to the chain easily, or just a little bit more, or with a little bit more difficulty? Like, they're not even arguing about whether it can or
who can override that? Who in authority in the Bitcoin, the BSV fraternity can override that, or even the government? Because here we're talking about a $2 trillion investment, and it's so big that it can rock the whole market of the USA and the world. It has national security implications too.
Yeah.
I don't know whether this whole thing is being driven by some other players we don't know about, but if you had, if there were authority to obliterate such trivialities, how would they do it, and what would you do? Again, if you had the authority over people to do it, how would you do it? How would you do it so that the family was looked after?
I think so. It's just like a lot of things. It's like very technically, the United States could drop nuclear bombs on the whole planet, just kill everybody. Like the USA could just kill everybody this afternoon if it decided to. It's a couple of button presses. The problem is it's just a couple of button presses plus the emotional weight of having, to do such a thing, plus, hey, is every general who's got the other key that has to be turned, like, are they going to do it? Does it cause a coup? Like, like all these, there's lots of other things. Like nobody's authority is absolute. As much as it might say it on paper and you're the toughest guy in the universe and all this other stuff, your ability to make a really powerful decision ultimately does also require you to convince lots of other layers of things that you might have not even known existed until you start to really go down a path like this. It's the same thing in Bitcoin. Trivially, like this could be done. The technical aspect of it is near zero. It is a very simple thing to have BTC's entirety of its network resorbed into BSV and all of this.
That to me is thrilling. I'm just looking at how it could be achieved, because I know that the members of in Congress, people are cynical about why they're there. They work hard and they try to do what they think is best. And I think, although it couldn't be a unilateral decision by a president, and there would have to be cooperation, I think that if we were able to approach representatives of the public, some of those would try to steer us towards a solution that did tokenize BTC in a way that the BTC holders were protected. The BSV people still had their BSV. The end result, let's call it BSV of the future, just to save confusion, everybody would then benefit. It would be an adoption par excellence, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, this is part of the reason why, throughout the Bitcoin Civil War, my advice to everybody was not to sell their coins. Don't split your coins. If you have anything that you're just sitting on, let this all play out, because what you're describing, this resorption of everything, is one of the ways that I think it should play out, frankly. And
does it mean that if somebody has Bitcoin, that it retains its value? For example, the store of value of BTC versus the store of value of BSV, do they end up the same price?
I think one of the most plausible ways that this plays out is that they essentially become a basket value of things. So whatever the value is, when you talk about a whole Bitcoin, it is the combined value of however many splits exist. Let's just say it's BTC, BCH, and BSV has some basket value. I think they come closer to parity with each other. And I think BSV stands to benefit the most because it's the lowest priced, but also the most technically capable. And if everything ends up moving to BSV for technical reasons, I think that BSV ends up coming to some kind of near equilibrium because of the perfect nature of the arbitrage opportunity. Like they're essentially the same thing.
Doesn't that mean the store of value of BTC just vanishes? Because you might as well store in BSV. It's going to be more used, more valuable, and BTC is basically
maybe I don't know. People are crazy. It's the why does gold have a value? I mean,
okay. I understand. You're talking about sentiment. You're talking about sentiment and
yes.
And what's the word? Nostalgia. That will go away pretty fast. People are pretty smart these days. Things happen real fast. My guess is, correct me if I'm wrong, my guess is, although there would be nostalgia and hold on to your BTC, who knows what's going to happen, people would soon realize the winner here was BSV, and that's the one to get on board because there's more and more demand for the very thing that enables BTC. My guess is that BTC itself would devalue as a store of value generally and plummet down. I mean, why have a BTC that's enabled by BSV when you can have the BSV itself. So now I'm again alarmed at the prospect of people holding BTC, thinking it's going to be the same, and finding out that it's basically redundant.
So we actually have a little bit of an analog example of this, and it is wrapped BTC on Ethereum. So people wrap their BTC tokens and they reissue them as WBTC in order to use them on DeFi tools across the Ethereum ecosystem. Now, did that make BTC more valuable or less valuable? And what we don't know is what is the antagonism of the value of Ethereum versus the value of BTC because of that relationship. Now, both sides would say, well, this is a temporary thing. All the value is going to go to BTC. And then your ETH people are saying the opposite. ETH is more useful and therefore the value will go that direction. My 11-month-old says hi. I don't know if you can hear him. But so it's one of those things that you don't really know. How much of that value is tied to the fact that they're both more useful because of each other? We don't actually know what that economic calculation is because it's very fluid.
From what you're saying, it sounds as though the functionality bundled up by ETH around BTC is only there because nobody's done it in BSV yet, but BSV could do it and make the other one redundant, right?
Well, I guess that's my point, is that it already feels redundant, and there's been wrapped BTC. It's the primary place where liquidity sat in BTC's ecosystem was on Ethereum for many, many years. Now, that has only recently changed with these ETFs and Michael Saylor and what they're all doing, like wrapping essentially Bitcoin paper derivatives and holding them on balance sheets that way. But for many, many years, it was just on Ethereum, and it was the largest store of BTC was occurring on the Ethereum network. And so I still think it's crazy, but people, they have decided for whatever reason that BTC is just fundamentally a store of value, or it's a Veblen good in that it's valuable because it's valuable. And
yeah, okay. So that's again coming back.
Humans are crazy. We are a crazy species, and so it's very hard to predict these kind of things.
I don't think we're a crazy species. We eventually figure it out and we get it right. So we're back, I'm afraid, to the death of BTC, because you've said there's little functionalities around here. Huh?
Perhaps. I don't know. It's the same thing. Gold is a lot less useful as money than it was 50 years ago or 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. It is more useful as a aspect of technology and some other things. Gold is very useful as a physical item used in manufacturing or lots of other things, but it is at a near all-time high again as a store of value for reasons that really can't be explained other than you can talk about all the problems with the dollar, and therefore we can predict that gold is more valuable, but gold is not more valuable because it became more useful as money. It has only absorbed that value simply because it is unchanging, and people have decided that gold is fundamentally
scarce and limited. It's scarce and limited. That's why gold's valuable, and it's pretty too, and it's got a lot of sentimental value.
I agree.
But we're talking about functionality here. I'm back to thinking, as I say, that we're now looking at the death of BTC, unless, by the way, the gradual process of waking up to the uselessness of BTC compared with what BSV can do to replace it, the confusion will cause delay. There's a huge amount of delaying effect by confusion. So in some ways that's good, but it makes me very uncomfortable because I'm still looking now back at the death of BTC. It's got to be talked openly. It's got to be, I would like it if it were managed by people, the publics and their representatives, in advance of it just being a market shambles, a market demand, supply versus demand, people discovering that BSV can do everything, including store of value, better than BTC, and remembering that this is an electronic thing in exponential times. It can be a .com crash, as Gavin was talking about with Michael Saylor. It can happen very fast. I hate to think what's going to happen to Michael Saylor. I think he's a good guy, but I don't think he knows about the functionality of BSV, that it can fully replace BTC, and I agree. Carnage.
Yeah. Maybe if I could toss a comment in here.
Go for it.
The thought that comes to my mind when thinking this through, the parallel to gold is very obvious, but I think there's a parallel to another metal, which is steel. And steel is a composite. It is like a specific alloy of, a certain amount of nickel, a certain amount of copper, and I think a certain amount of iron. And
Yeah, it's
so
primarily iron.
yeah. So, but it's in this, these very specific ratios, if it's 8% copper and 5% nickel or something like that, it has a specific amount of stress that it can endure. And so if you think about these various different implementations of Bitcoin, and BTC is one. And as Kurt was saying, it has the benefit of sort of the backing of these paper derivatives, dragons, and on the one hand, that's really good. But on the other hand, when we're talking about, if we just think about it in terms of steel, there's a very specific balance that makes it actually have the property of being useful as a central beam in the construction of a giant skyscraper. And in a world where we're still living in mud huts, etc., then it's not necessarily as important. Maybe someone comes along and says, okay, it's steel that's mostly iron. I don't have as much iron reserve, so I'm going to try to market this version of steel that is mostly copper or nickel or something like that. And it still has the properties of being a composite alloy between these three metals, so you could describe it as being like, steel-esque or having very similar properties as steel. But the fundamental utility of it as being, able to endure, its utility as a central beam, you don't actually get to learn. And I think that what Kurt's talking about in terms of, scaling Teranode up, and, the millions of transactions per second, and what you're talking about, Bruce, and being able to take on the workload of a platform like X, and being able to demonstrate to Congress, this is going to, the proof is going to be in the pudding, so to speak, when it comes to, when we actually start to scale this infrastructure, and we realize that BlackRock and Michael Saylor, they've ended up hoarding all of this version of the steel that ends up it lacks all of the properties that are going to be useful in this new architecture. And so the question of whether or not it dies, I mean, maybe you can melt it down and extract the part that actually is valuable, recomposite it into components that are more useful for utility, and that's always possible as well. But at the end of the day, it's really going to be commercial success that drives what that utility is. And it's it's my contention, I think it's a lot of people's contention, that is the unique properties of BSV that allows for big, specifically big blocks, that allows for the most utility. In other words, imagine a skyscraper where you can say big blocks would be the equivalent of saying, well, there's no structural there's no structural disadvantage to building a skyscraper that is literally 1,000,000 or 1,000,000,000,000 floors high, and there's also no latency. So one of the problems of a giant skyscraper might be, well, it would be impossible to get from the elevator from ground 1 to ground, to floor 1,000,000,000,000 in a useful amount of time. So there's a practical disadvantage to building a skyscraper that high. But within the architecture of BSV, because of its modular design, because of all the things that Kurt described, and it's not just we're not just competing with other blockchain solutions. I mean, we realistically are competing with platforms like Oracle, like AWS, any of these data architecture platforms, because even with their sophisticated infrastructure, their massive budgets, and being guided by luminaries like Bezos, etc., it still comes down to the fact of there's a certain architecture that can support basically an unbounded length of a skyscraper, and we're talking about data. There's just an unbounded ability to quantify and qualify and monetize that data, and that's why BSV stands out.
Okay, so just to grab that idea, so you're not too scared about a devastating crash of BTC and the rage that would come from that. and the devastation of lives, mum and pop investors, corporations, mutual funds, that sort of stuff. You're not so scared of that because you think there's too much momentum in the existing installed, limited but still effective usefulness and functionality of BTC.
Yeah, I mean, just in the example of the misappropriation or misallocation of that steel, you know, it when you're talking about building a 1 or 2 story home, you know, maybe if it's not the right allocation of the properties of steel, it's not going to surface when you're talking about building a 2-story home. So Michael Saylor, you know, he's building a 2-story home, and he's just saying, you know, that you know, the flaws, the imperfections in the steel are masked by the fact that it's just not, you know, enduring much load. When we're talking about actually scaling this up, you know, that home will eventually replace itself, and it's not my prerogative to tell him when he should knock his 2-story home down and build a you know, a 10 million story home, because at the end of the day, I don't have the same prerogatives as him. But I think when we're talking about looking out to a future, especially, you know, a future that has the ability to be as different in terms of the commercial opportunities as when the onset of the internet arrived, you know, the difference between the 1970s and the commercial strategies versus, you know, 2010s and 2020s, you know, I think that that the results are going to speak for themselves, and it is going to result in basically the strategy B, or whatever he's redefined, you know, his 2-story home to be. They're going to have to melt it all down, just as he did, you know, when the dot-com bubble collapsed. He lost, you know, a record amount of profits in a single day, or a record amount of capital in a single day. He's going to have to collapse it all to the ground, and then, you know, within the rubble there will be useful components. There, you know, there's still going to be things that you can extract from that and turn it into something of value. But it's just, you know, by this point, the BSV infrastructure and architecture will, you know, will have just passed him and lapped him multiple times.
Okay, so that leaves us with the comforting thought that it is safe to consider, in maybe a further session, the active promotion of BSV to radically increase uptake of it. So generally we feel there's too much confusion, too much already built infrastructure in BTC for it to just crash. So we're not too scared of that. But we can the more confidently say, well, let's give BSV a real highlight in the world. So there's a lot of uptake. People can enjoy the micro payments and the tokenization, everything like that. Do we agree as a group that?
Yeah, I would say yes. I mean, this is something I've said to people for a long time. If you're going to buy BTC at $110,000 a coin or whatever right now, it would cost you less than $500 to also buy one BSV and one BCH and have exactly zero risk in your whole portfolio. And so this is a really easy thing for the BTC people to absorb and have a risk-free Bitcoin basket portfolio, given all the possibilities we've talked about today. Now,
Okay.
it's way different if you've been a sole BSV supporter and you're not confident about BSV, and therefore, hey, it's $30 to buy a BSV, it's 400 and something bucks to buy a BCH, and it's $110,000 to buy one BTC. That is a much more difficult thing to balance out your portfolio. But I also think that it's a lot lower risk for somebody who looks at the landscape and says, okay, if BSV does what Bitcoin was always supposed to do, I get access to that for $30 or $35 right now. But BTC, I always say, is the best performing asset in world history from a dollar growth standpoint. And so then you have to ask yourself, should anybody be buying something that has already had the largest run up in world history? Your risk reward ratio on your investment is the worst possible risk reward ratio investment that has ever been presented to the world. And so it's a fascinating piece of psychology that people still continue, and it's actually not people, it is only institutions at this point. Retail adoption is near a 7-year low right now on BTC, but institutional adoption is at all-time high, and it's because only they are willing to take the risk right now, because that risk is is too big for a person, but not too big for an institution, which then leads me to ask what's actually going on, because they would typically be a less risky investor than a retail investor. So I see that as flipped, and I don't know why. And that really bothers me about my own thesis about investing in Bitcoin and whatever else.
Okay. Anyway,
But,
we're pretty much out of time now. Are you interested in having another session where we talk about specifics of promotion?
I would love to. I'd be very happy to.
Sure. Yeah. Count me in.
Gavin, are you there?
I
Yeah,
count
yeah,
Gavin
I'm in. One is the Mitch getting on the Sean Ryan podcast for sure. That's one preview because it's perfect for Sean Ryan right now. He's talking all about how his number one concern is the grid, the U.S. grid going down, and nobody's presenting a solution. All they do is fear. But Metawatt and Bitcoin, Metawatt and Bitcoin presents a solution.
Yeah, I think that the energy problem has been dealt with fairly well by a guy called Tony Seba. If you look at his videos on YouTube, basically we're heading apparently into a period of over, what is it calling? Superpower, that is abundance from solar, wind, and battery, let alone things like thorium reactors or and other energy supplies, geothermal, for example. So, I mean, we do have to look at the AI gluttony for energy and probably the network as well. So, but that's I don't think that's so relevant to whether or not we should promote BSV. If anything, BSV might help. I don't know, but we can discuss that.
Well, once you get, you may want to do a preview about the shows I've had with Mitch Birchman, and then you know that's why BSV Bitcoin SV solves that problem with the grid.
Okay, great.
Yeah, it's super important because this guy is the one of the few people in the world who understands it and how to do it with his company.
Could we get him in on this discussion?
Yeah, I can set that up.
Wonderful. All right. So we'll schedule the time. Thank you, viewers, for watching. Take what you will from it. Write comments under the video that you watch. It may be on all of our feeds. The idea was to spread this around, get ideas from the people, the followers as well. Thank you very much for watching, and thank you
guys for participating in this great discussion. Bye for now.
Yeah, thank you, Bruce.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you.
For tuning in.
All right. Stop recording.